Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing another fantasy world building video, this time on symbols, their importance and their meaning. If you've watched any of my other fantasy world building videos, you might be wondering why I'm not on camera. Well, I'm trying something different this time. Also, it's more important that you focus on the symbols and not me. So let's get started. First, let's look at it from a very simplistic view. It might be that in your fantasy world you could say the reason there are a lot of symbols and signs is to do with literacy, and it would be a very easy way to do it. However, if you look at our world, you look at how we use symbols, we're surrounded by them every day. So I'm going to explore symbols in our world that will hopefully help you build something interesting into your fantasy world. So if you're watching this on your phone or even your PC, it's likely that you talk to your friends via various messaging services and you've been using emojis. These are a super fast shortcut, a way of expressing emotions, and they become quite advanced and can be very, very specific. But if you're a little bit older like me, then you might remember when mobile phones first came out and we only had basic text characters. But even then, we were creating emojis to express emotions, whether it was happy or sad, or this one, which I think is sticking your tongue out. I don't really remember. But if you think about signs more broadly, if you're walking down any high street and you look at the shop signs, you look at your clothes, the cars, a lot of companies now have brands without words. They want that instant form and immediate recognition. You can go anywhere in the world, and if I show someone this symbol, the golden arches, people will know exactly what it represents. And in hundreds of countries, if they walk into that shop, they know what they'll get as well. Some companies used to have words on their logos, but they've moved away from that. And some of the biggest and most powerful ones can be included in this. Starbucks used to have their name, and then they've just moved to this. They have, of course, the bluebird of Twitter. Then you get other companies like Shell, Apple, Nike with the swirl. And of course, there's even car brands now that don't bother to have any words on at all. It's just a logo to tell you who they are. But it's not just brands on the high street. They're in buildings, whether it's signs for the fire exit, whether it's crossing the street, where it's road signs that you see all of the time. And all of this leads me on to a guy called Scott McCloud. If you've never heard of him before, he's a cartoonist who essentially wrote the book on how to write comics. And when I say that, I mean that literally. He has written a number of books about creating comics, reinventing comics, and he's an expert on visual communication. He's spoken at length around the world, and he's done TED Talks, he's lectured at Harvard, he's talked to people at Google, MIT, he's talked to people in Shanghai, and I've been lucky enough to see a couple of his talks in person in the UK. I've included a couple of links down below so you can see what he's talking about. A couple of years ago, I saw one of his talks on comics and visual communication, and he, at his core, is an incredible storyteller. And he's spoken about the fact that even if you go back to ancient history, you get cave paintings where you could argue humans didn't have language, but they still wanted to leave something behind to tell stories about who they were. Then you move forward in time, right through to all of the signs they've talked about in buildings that have no words but very, very quickly tell you exactly what's going on. Let's look at another aspect of society which is relevant, of course, to your fantasy world. If I show you these two symbols, you immediately know that they refer to Christianity. Then, of course, there's the Star of David for Judaism, there's the yin-yang symbol for Taoism, and all of these symbols convey very strong emotions. They have a rich history, they're deep in spirituality, they bring people peace and comfort, and they remind them of their core of beliefs. So these are very positive symbols. But symbols can also be used to create something full of hate and suffering and horror in the mind. Now, I'm not going to show you this symbol from World War II. You know the one I'm talking about, but just the sign of that symbol makes people feel sick and angry and upset because it reminds them of all horrible things that were done by people wearing this symbol. Moving away from religion, let's look about symbols for other things. For years and even centuries, doctors have been using this symbol, the caduceus, to represent what they do. There's also the pestle and mortar, which can be used for a chemist or an apothecary. And in the past centuries in England, doctors used to be very, very expensive. So of course, people would instead go to the local chemist if they had any pains or problems. And if you couldn't read, you'd probably find this symbol in the window. And if I can say it, it is an apothecary car boy. It's a very specific outline that tells the person walking by what the person does inside and that they can get help. But moving forward, even into modern day, we know that the green cross means healing, health, and help for sick people. The Red Cross is also both an organization, but a symbol for medicine and relief. Soldiers often painted a cross on their helmets or on their uniform to indicate that they were a medic. So it's an important point to raise, is to say that, of course, symbols are not just there for the illiterate, whether it's in this world or in the fantasy world that you've created. They surround us every day, and they're very, very useful and quick way of communicating things. So I want you to bring some of these symbols into your fantasy world. I've done it with mine, but I can't really talk about what many of them are without spoiling any of the stories. So in your fantasy world, are there symbols for religions, for organization, for different parts of society? Perhaps you have guilds, whether it's a thieves guild or a warriors guild or a merchant guild. What if you have different kind of clans or different levels of society with kings and queens and dukes? People would paint their symbols on their shields and their armor to show who they followed. You have symbols for other everyday things. Even in today, you have a striped pole outside a barber shop. You might have a quill for someone who's a scribe, an apothecarist, as I've talked about. You could have scales for merchants or moneylender. And in today in the UK, we have something called pawnbrokers or pawn shops. And what they typically do is they hang 3 balls outside the shop. And this originally came from Italy, so it's been used in other countries too. Symbols, of course, could be something a lot more obvious. They could be on the skin. They could be tattoos for gangs and power and clans. The Yakuza in Japan, of course, tattoo all of their people. You have signs for pubs and taverns, sometimes with words and sometimes not. Sometimes with just the name or a symbol of an animal or something like that. Organizations I've talked about have power, and having a symbol that represents them, which could be something very good and very bad, and it immediately gives an effect and people will understand who they're dealing with. So here's the other thing. With adding all these symbols, it adds something to the world building in terms of the history. Where did the symbol come from? Where did the clan or group or organization come from? Why is it that simple? Why is it still being used today? What purpose does it serve in your fantasy world? So it adds to the world by bringing history to it. Here's one more symbol. It's the Headspace symbol. Headspace is a private online writing community that I've created on Discord. I've set it up for writers so we can learn and grow and improve our craft from each other. So if this video or any of the others are useful, think about joining the group and I would really appreciate it. So don't forget, there are other videos on here about fantasy world building. Be sure to check them out, but I'll be back soon with another video, and thanks for watching.